Jim's Golden Rules. This collection of golden rules, or guidelines, are comprised of what I began developing in my early teenage years to navigate what we mortals call life. Many worked their way into the moral compass I continue to live by today. Since grade school, I have self-reflected and self-corrected in everything I do. I evaluate my performance and think of ways to do better the next time. I don't recall that anyone taught me to do this. It just sort of happened, and each time I applied what I had concluded, I got better at whatever it was I was doing. That daily brain exercise of reflecting, correcting, became the origin of many of these golden rules. They were reminders for me of things that didn't turn out that well to ensure I didn't make the same mistakes again, which is kind of unproductive. A few are the result of things that have worked for me most of my life, causing some to attach the moniker genius to my name, though I have always remained unpretentious. Others are based on the principled life I have tried to live each day, to always do the right thing. One need not adhere to all these golden rules to be a good person. They're not commandments. They are more like advice or suggestions, though some may help you work through dilemmas in your personal or business life. It's your choice. They're here to reflect my view of what defines a good person. Your interpretation may be different. One thing for sure, though, you must be a good person in order to be a good mentor. No exceptions. Quote, "Always do the right thing. For those who have had good mentors, you probably already are." Unquote. There are many different sets of rules or laws in life's rulebook. For example, they may come from the Ten Commandments, or maybe the Boy Scout oath, and dozens of other places. They are mostly all good and worthy of obeying, but no list is complete. I have narrowed it all down to a single law. Always do the right thing. It's simple and easy to remember, but there is a catch. If you have had good mentors in your life, you probably always do the right thing already, or at least try. If you haven't had the benefit of good mentoring, though, doing the right thing can be a challenge because it requires good judgment and common sense, which must be taught, not acquired. If everyone always did the right thing, well, that's utopia. Unfortunately, we're far off from that level of consciousness. It doesn't mean you can't start working on it now, though, with small incremental improvements. To follow this law, or rule, you may have to forego several of the others. That could be hard for some. Otherwise, doing the right thing could mean different things to different people. Here's an example. If someone, a really bad person, was hurting your child that would probably result in their death, and you had an opportunity to stop or prevent it, with potentially dire consequences, what would you do? You can choose to abide by God's law, or you can do the right thing, even if it may conflict with your moral principles. Here's another example. In many states, if an intruder crosses your threshold and threatens you or your family in any way, even with a pocket knife or baseball bat, you have a legal right to shoot them dead. That's man's law. But is it the right thing to do? Early in my youth hockey undertaking, a boy showed up in our locker room at tryouts. He was an 11-year-old, very outspoken, and a darn good hockey player. Soon afterward, I learned his father had died a couple years earlier. I started helping out by providing rides home and back for games and practices. Over the course of the next several years, I became a mentor and sort of surrogate father to this youngster and took him to interesting places, did things for him and with him that would be expected of any dad. I tried to make his life as normal as possible despite his circumstance. No one asked this of me. I just thought it was the right thing to do. He grew up to become a good citizen of the world and a loving father. If you only find one golden rule in this book worthy of your consideration, this should be the one. All the other golden rules, while specific by design, are based on the premise of always doing the right thing. Should you lack the good judgment required to do the right thing today, surround yourself with mentors and observe and question their actions. Let them be your guides. Before long, you too will always be doing the right thing. Quote, perfection is something seldom achieved, but that shouldn't preclude you from still trying every day. Unquote. We would all love for everything to be perfect, but the reality is that perfection is something seldom achieved. That shouldn't keep you from trying every day, though, regardless of the potential outcome. The path to perfection is through incremental improvement, by doing something repeatedly and getting better at it each time you try. Everything you do in life is a learning experience. Everything. You need to internally evaluate, identify areas for improvement, and then make the necessary corrections. Back in my youth hockey days, there was a boy at my newspaper office one afternoon killing time between games. I published a youth hockey newspaper for several years. He had to sign his name on a team roster, and it looked terrible. Not all that surprising for a 12-year-old signature. I gave him a few tips, suggested he use printed letters at the start of his first and last name, and finish things off with cursive. I probably didn't make his teacher happy, but it looked pretty good. He sat there for more than an hour signing his name hundreds of times. He experimented and made small incremental improvements. When it was time to leave for the game, that signature looked DNP, damn near perfect. During my short stint as a pro trainer for a Southern Hockey League team, we were up at training camp in Ontario, Canada. One player, who went on to play in more than 400 games in the WHA, World Hockey Association, and the NHL, would stay on the ice every afternoon at the end of our session. With the lights dimmed, he would line up pucks and shoot several hundred wrist shots, a sweeping motion using your wrists, at the goal net from more than 100 feet away. He aimed for specific corners, top left and right, bottom left and right. He did it every day for a month for more than an hour. To help him with his quest for perfection, I had a couple boys from the town's youth program rush home from school each afternoon and get on the ice to retrieve pucks. That allowed him to double the number of shots he could take. No one asked him to do it, and I don't think it was much fun, but he did it anyway. Small incremental improvements. Don't let the fear that something won't come out perfect prevent you from trying. Swing that bat, kick that ball, hammer that nail, bake that pie, or make that sales presentation. Because one thing is for certain. If you don't try, you will never be perfect at anything. Quote, you can't expect to get better at something if you keep doing it the same way every time. Unquote. What's the definition of insanity? Doing something the same way over and over again and expecting a different result. Here's my spin. You'll never get better at something if you keep doing it the same way every time. Unless, of course, you are already doing it perfectly. And that's unlikely. Back to incremental improvement again, a common thread throughout many of my golden rules. I've been around long enough to remember when the Golden Arches said, 2 million served. Over the past 5 decades, McDonald's has made vast improvements in the way they prepare and serve food. Of course, the bottom line was to save money, but the underlying theme was to get better, so they could be more competitive and serve more customers with their existing buildings and crew. Restaurants that keep doing things the same old way are either already closed or close to it. Some call it progress, but it's really about getting better at something each time you do it. One of my packaging job responsibilities was to do project labor estimates and then follow that up with performing time studies on our production lines. The goal was to try to squeeze every bit of efficiency out of each line worker. I would often see three people doing the exact same thing, such as folding a corrugated cardboard tray used in a display unit. One person would just be going along pumping out folded trays, while the other two workers struggled to produce half the output. Closer observation would reveal that the productive worker had developed her own technique, which was a little different and better than the others. As I observed, the line worker would continue improving on her methodology. I'd stop the line and have the productive worker teach the others how to do it better and easier. Others on the line would observe and think of ways to make their task better and hence easier. It's a contagious kind of positive thinking. A line running at 75% efficiency the first day could be at 125% by the third, simply by trying new things to make it better. Nothing can change if you don't try new things. Though change, simply for the sake of change, or shuffling things laterally to be different, is a time and energy waster and should be avoided. But change for the better, thinking outside the box, is a different story. Always look to make things better, not different. Quote, "Good enough is never good enough." Unquote. Around the end of my 20-year volunteer hockey stint, I started doing home improvements for people on weekends to keep busy. My brother would often join me on a Saturday as my helper. I would be building a basement wall, setting a wood 2x4 that was not supporting anything above and not on a critical drywall seam. The air-powered nail gun might shift the upright to the right or left a quarter inch as it drove the long nails through the wood. My brother would put the 4-foot level on it and say, "Not good enough." The good enough comes from the old Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon and the sinister Russian villain, Boris Badenov. My brother already called me James Moose from the time I was a youngster. Bullwinkle was a moose. So references to the show were common in our dialogue. I'd say, "But it doesn't matter." And he would reply, "Everything matters." So I would pull my hammer off my belt, give the 2x4 a few whacks, and drive another nail or two into the beam for good measure. My brother would put the level back on the beam and say, "That's better." Truth is, good enough is never good enough. Have you ever observed anyone who just goes through the motions without concern for the outcome? I bet you see it almost every day. Doing something and doing something well are two very different things. One of our assistant coaches back in my youth hockey days, a big guy, former professional football player, would paint an imaginary P on the front of a boy's jersey or shirt and say, "That P stands for pride. You have to have pride in everything you do." He was a good mentor. Aside from being a physical education teacher at a local high school, he built furniture in the basement of his huge home. It was his hobby. The stuff he built was gorgeous and all showroom quality. I was in awe of his creations. He put a lot of pride into everything he built for his family and friends. Taking pride in everything you do will certainly garner some attention and earn the respect of others. Let's not confuse this with perfection, though. We already know that perfection is seldom achieved, but it shouldn't preclude you from trying anyway. Take pride in what you do. Always try to do your very best, regardless of how menial and routine the task may be. Never settle for good enough. That's reserved for the unmotivated and those who expect something for nothing, those who expect a promotion or recognition for a half-hearted effort. In the real world, there are no participation trophies. Always shoot for the stars. You may not get there every time, but it doesn't cost anything except for some of your extra effort and hard work. Quote, seek out multiple good mentors. They will each provide pieces of that puzzle we call life. Unquote. Aside from my parents, who did a good job raising me, and my older brother who died when I was 13, not getting a chance to finish his mission, I had an interesting assemblage of mentors in my life. The first was my grade school physical education teacher. It might have been 4th or 5th grade when I was first introduced to him. He was a former Marine drill sergeant who didn't bark at you, but said things firmly enough to let you know he meant business. There was no slacking in his class. I became one of his patrol boys, crossing guards, from 6th to 8th grade and got to spend even more time around him. He taught me about honor, discipline, respect, and perseverance. All are qualities I still cherish today. Next was the general manager of a new $10 million sports complex, $1970, which included a beautiful ice arena that opened a few blocks from where I grew up. He was an older black man and a true gentleman. I was 15 and a half and had never really known anyone of color. At my grammar school, there were no black kids in the 60s, and it was the largest city in New Jersey. In high school, there were maybe a handful of black kids out of 1,200, and they sort of kept to themselves. This manager, though, was a good guy, a good mentor, and I didn't see any color when I looked at him or when we talked. What little prejudice I might have grown up with, he washed away. It's complicated, but although I didn't work for the city, I had acquired a master key for the entire multi-million-dollar complex. When this manager found out about my key, he was the only other person with one. He let me keep it because he had more trust and faith in me to do the right thing than the couple dozen employees the city had saddled him with. I never let him down. I couldn't. There were others. Jack Leclerc, a former Montreal Canadian, whom I referenced several times throughout this book. I worked for and with Jack for nearly a decade at hockey schools, ice rinks, on benches with peewee and semi-pro hockey players, and got to tip back plenty of Canadian beer, along with having some lively conversation over those years. He was a positive father-type figure with a great attitude about life. Next, there was a sporting goods store runner whom I worked alongside in numerous hockey programs. He employed me when I needed a job, helped me get my youth hockey newspaper started, and has always been there for me, a friend for life. A plant manager early in my packaging career was a seasoned veteran in the industry and taught me how to treat people with respect and work hard to earn success. Finally, there was a business owner, my employer of 13 years, who believed in me enough to get me off the plant floor and into a suit and tie every day. I can't even begin to explain what I learned from him as a sort of sidekick for a decade. Add in a few really good parents of young hockey players, all of which were good mentors themselves. I was fortunate to have had a diverse complement of personalities to provide guidance and continually fulfill my thirst for knowledge. Seek out multiple mentors. Your parents may be, or have been, good mentors, but the wide-ranging knowledge you will acquire from multiple mentors, hopefully good mentors, will be invaluable along your life path. The collective learning you will gain is priceless. Quote, learn something new every day, and before long, people may be calling you a genius. Unquote. People have been calling me a genius, well, forever. I guess it partly has to do with me recording a high score on an IQ test when I was 13. However, it takes a lot more than a test score to be recognized as a genius. Early in my packaging career, I spent countless hours observing how our machinery worked. I was tasked with keeping the equipment running and training other mechanics to do the same. Aside from thinking of ways to make the machines work better, I focused on what made them tick. I needed to understand how and why things worked the way they did. I was learning new things every day. Over the years, I built a lot of custom equipment to do specific tasks to meet particular customer needs. I'd spend a few days thinking of how I would want a machine to work. Then I would come in one morning and build a complex control panel on the bench with nothing more than what I envisioned in my mind. I used the knowledge I had obtained from observing other equipment, things I had learned, and adapted it to this new project. When PLCs, programmable logic controllers, a kind of computer that runs your car and other machinery, were introduced to packaging equipment in the late 80s, I embraced them. I read the manuals, taught myself how they worked, then wrote the programs and converted our existing machines, which ridded us of troublesome mechanical relays. It was good for our company and good for me to learn and understand something new. Later in my packaging career in the mid-90s, we needed a way to track our plant operations. I purchased a copy of Microsoft Access, a database program, and immersed myself in the manuals and tutorial, filling my mind with knowledge. I had our first application written in 2 weeks. Over a couple months, I followed that up with additional modules that ran every function of our business. Eventually, an $80 million company with 8 plant locations, all connected through my applications. Today, I'm still developing an Access and continue to learn new things. I don't think I accomplished these tasks because I was a genius, although I might be underestimating myself. I believe I was able to do these things because I was constantly expanding my knowledge, reading through each machine manual carefully, no internet searches in the 80s, observing how things worked and understanding the concepts thoroughly. Back then, I was learning a lot more than one new thing every day, maybe dozens. When personal computers came along in the early 90s, I would read through every manual included with the machines or software, cover to cover. I learned how things work before trying to use them. Yes, I am that one guy in the world who always reads the instructions first, and everyone has called me a genius for 40 years. Something to think about. This all takes a lot of work, effort, and dedication, things that many people are not willing to commit. Because of my relentless thirst for knowledge and understanding, I am versed, or can at least get by, in 100 or more different subjects. As such, everyone comes to me for answers to questions. That's a good quality to have when you're a mentor. A good mentor. Quote, "We are all faced with challenges. Think it through, work out a solution, and move on." Unquote. A boy on a youth hockey team had CCD lessons, religious teaching program, on the same night as our scheduled practices. I had to pick him up at a parishioner's house every practice night and race back to the rink while he changed into his equipment. The first night we tried this, the boy struggled to get dressed in my back seat, which had less than a foot of legroom, despite my assumption that would be the best place for him in his bulky equipment bag. After giving it some thought, the next week I set out all his equipment in the back seat within arm's reach, but I had the boy get into the front seat for a quick drive to the rink. There were nearly 2 feet of legroom in the front passenger seat, which was plenty of space to wriggle things on and bend over to put on skates. I handed him equipment from the back seat as he needed it. It worked like a charm for 2 seasons. It only took a little extra thought to work out an effective solution. In 1980, my license was suspended for 6 months. It wasn't for doing anything criminal, but for failing to pay 2 silly $35 tickets on time. Despite not having a license, I still had to get to work every day, which was a 14-mile trip. I went to the local Honda motorcycle dealer and purchased an Indian moped. You didn't need a license to ride them back then. I rode to and from work every day for 6.5 months, through rain, cold, and snow. To combat the inclement weather, I bought a one-piece racing suit that kept me reasonably warm and dry. Big problem solved, and I didn't miss a day of work. Our company was awarded a multi-million-dollar contract to create multi-packs. For freshness purposes, the sealed product had to be packaged in Chicago, where at the time we had no facility. We got the news on a Friday afternoon without any advance notice. On Saturday, a business associate flew to Chicago to look at commercial properties. I was vacationing that weekend but flew home Sunday night and was in Chicago early Monday morning. We had a one-year building lease signed by noon. I was already calling equipment manufacturers that morning, rush ordering the major items we would need to build 2 automated lines I had sketched out during my flight. Within 2 weeks, we had the new facility set up with functional office space, communications, and a production floor ready for our custom lines. I don't think FEMA could have done it better or quicker. Our mechanics in New Jersey built the lines in 3 weeks based on my vision and shipped it all to Chicago, where we spent a couple days setting everything up. Within 4 weeks, we were running 2 lines on 2 shifts and pumping out tens of thousands of packages a day ahead of schedule. There was no time for planning this project. We had to think it through and come up with a solution or pass on it, which wasn't an option. Life isn't perfect. To quote Forrest Gump, shit happens. When it does, don't panic or overreact. Think it through, figure out how to deal with it, and move on to the next challenge. When I was faced with a dilemma, my mom would suggest that I sleep on it. It worked most every time. Give it a try. Quote, "We all make mistakes in life. It's how we deal with those mistakes afterwards that really matters." Unquote. I've made some mistakes in my life. Some not so bad and some humdingers. I'm pretty sure we all have or will someday. I haven't always been proud of the way I handled them afterward, but each one became a learning experience. I told you I wasn't perfect. None of us are. Back in my youth hockey days, I drove a 14-year-old and a couple other teammates to a late afternoon game. It was the day after Thanksgiving, and the boy had spent the past few hours at a local girl's house having a post-Thanksgiving brunch with her family. As soon as he got in the car, I knew something was off. It didn't take long to find out he had some wine with lunch, and afterward, more than a couple glasses. Once we got to the rink, he spent some time kneeling over the porcelain puke receptacle, making multiple deposits. The team hit the ice, but he couldn't do it. It took another 20 to 30 minutes before he finally got out there, playing at maybe 60 to 70%. I wanted to read him the riot act for his indiscretion. I was his mentor after all. But I could tell he knew he had screwed up and let his team down that day. I didn't have to say a word, and it never happened again. When I was 17 working at a city-owned sports complex as a skate guard, the guy who keeps you skating in one direction on the ice, the facility hosted the first invitational mayor's track meet out on the football field and rubberized outdoor track. There were several thousand spectators, along with a slew of politicians, including the honorable mayor, who was a participant. The night before the track meet, I caught 3 kids breaking into the closed snack bar, taking a few handfuls of ice cream sandwiches, chips, and candy. I scolded the boys, all who were about 15 to 16, and told them to make sure it didn't happen again. I told my manager what had happened, and he was livid and commanded me to point out the perpetrators. He chastised the 3 boys and suspended them from the facility indefinitely. I thought that was harsh. The next day on the football field, while the track meet was in progress, 2 of the boys from the night before, plus a 3rd boy, encountered me at the registration table located around the 50-yard line. They cornered me against the concrete bleachers out of sight of the spectators while I tried to reason with them. Without warning, the new kid pulled his hand out of his pocket with a dog chain wrapped around it and slugged me in the face as hard as he could. I staggered a bit, falling to one knee, and was now out in full view of the spectators. A second kid picked up a wooden folding chair and broke it over my back, knocking me to the ground. They all ran. My nose was bleeding, but I was otherwise okay. The following Monday, I was at the City Detective Bureau looking through mugshots of little hoodlums when the mother of the kid with the chain called. Her 18-year-old son played high school varsity football and was awarded a scholarship to Arizona State. She begged me not to press charges, which would have most certainly rescinded his scholarship. The football player had an otherwise unblemished record, yet had a momentary lapse of reason while thinking he was helping a friend. He apologized and turned over the names of the other two perpetrators. With my nose and back still hurting, I accepted his apology and didn't press charges. I'm not sure how things turned out for him. We'll get to forgiveness in a few more pages. This rule is about mistakes. Some mistakes can be undone or corrected with little or no collateral damage. That's a good thing. Others are more permanent, like when taking someone's life. There is no turning back the clock, and if it's a big mistake, do-overs are not going to work. The damage has already been done. The best approach is to avoid making mistakes in the first place by always doing the right thing. Quote, "If you truly believe in something and have objective evidence to support it, you must defend it. Never compromise your principles. Without firm principles, you have nothing." Unquote. In 1971, when I was a sophomore in high school, a group decided to stage a peace rally on the adjacent football field. About half the student body attended, including me. I had just turned 15. There was no shouting or protests, just speeches by the mayor, clergy, and Vietnam veterans, along with some folk music. I wasn't protesting anything. I was curious and wanted to hear what the speakers had to say. It was a great way to spend a beautiful spring day sitting in the grass. The next day in homeroom, everyone who was out the day before was sent home with a letter. You could only return to school if you had a doctor's note for your absence, or you and your parents signed a statement stating that your absence was unexcused, although you specifically did not attend the scheduled peace rally. They thought it would look better on your school record for college applications. But I did attend a peace rally, willingly. My parents and I agreed that we would not be signing anything to the contrary. I spent 2.5 weeks at home before Mom and I were called to school for a conference. Despite my guidance counselor's efforts, we both stood firm and I was readmitted without signing the document. I was prepared to stay home indefinitely. What's right is right. Early in my packaging career, I worked for a company as their chief mechanic that put sealed bottles of vitamins in their final retail package. The dedicated room with the equipment was not a clean room, a dust-free room used for pharmaceutical packaging. But the customer did insist that we use hairnets to keep hair out of the sealed packages. I thought that was a sensible request, but the owner was cheap, so they would only hand out hairnets on the days the customer's quality inspector was in the building, which was usually twice a week. I thought that was wrong and deceptive. On those days, while the inspector was in the building, I flatly refused to go into that room, even if my equipment was acting up. Everybody in the company knew my position on the matter and would alert me when the inspector arrived. It infuriated our general manager, and I was threatened with suspension or termination more than once. After a couple of years of this nonsense, we hired an experienced supervisor for the department who insisted on hairnets every day for everyone, including the owner. I didn't have any more hairnet problems. Over the years, I have been cussed at and had pens thrown at me across the conference room table by owners and managers when I refused to comply with stupid policies or do something that was unethical. I was far from the do-gooder employee or whistleblower. I had no problem covering up a mess, provided we all agreed to fix it to everyone's satisfaction. We all needed jobs, after all. But I would not compromise my principles. Subjective opinions don't fit into this rule, and if you want to defend them, you are on your own. But clear objective evidence must be defended. Otherwise, you're part of the problem. Quote, persist in your endeavors regardless of the expected outcome. Never give up. Each of us has within the innate ability to accomplish whatever we set our minds to. If you think you can, keep trying. Unquote. I started up a youth hockey publication, the Hockey Review, in the mid-'70s. I was 20 years old and had no idea how to publish a newspaper, but through encouragement from several friends, I decided to give it a try. I read a couple books on the subject and talked to a few people in the industry. 8 weeks later, I published the first issue, 8,000 copies. I continued publishing for nearly a decade. I knew it would never make me rich, but it was a badly needed resource long before the internet, so I persevered. In the mid-'80s, after spending 13 years in youth hockey, I had seen and experienced quite a bit. Along the journey, a good dose of the bickering and politics that are often associated with youth sports, sometimes using kids as pawns in a complex game of chess. I had watched it all play out and wanted to try something different. I created an exhibition all-star program for top 11 to 14-year-old players. After 5 months of planning and preparing, funding much of it myself, my dream became a reality. It turned into more than a youth hockey program, a teaching and character building organization that included player contracts and report card reviews. I'm glad I stuck with it and was able to realize my vision. I worked as an athletic trainer with a Pee-wee 11 and 12-year-old hockey team in 1979-80. It was made up of a good gang of boys, a few accomplished players balanced out with several hard workers. All of them earned their spot on that team and contributed every game towards the end goal, the national championship. Teams from New Jersey in the late '70s were not often up to the caliber of groups from Massachusetts, Minnesota, or other big-time hockey states. But that didn't discourage our boys one bit. They were a determined bunch, and I made sure they remained focused throughout the year. We finished the season 38-6-3, qualifying for the Nationals, though we fell short in the semifinal game and had to settle for third in the nation. I'm still proud of every one of them for their untiring effort. They never gave up. Later in my packaging career, our company was bidding on a multi-year contract worth $30 million annually. So, it was a big deal. I worked tirelessly for weeks on the bid and associated documentation. We were one of 4 companies bidding on the proposal and the smallest by far than any of the other conglomerates. But we had untiring effort, which they lacked. 3 days before our final presentation to the customer, one of our owners, a creative genius, decided that we should have a model built to the production facility we would be operating. I worked day and night with our model maker building scale models of pallet racking, machines, conveyors, etc. It was built on a 3-foot by 4-foot board and looked fabulous. We carried it into the customer's conference room and set it down in the middle of the long table beginning our presentation in front of a dozen top executives. While we presented, no one could take their eyes off that model on the table. We were ultimately awarded the contract. Later, the program manager told me in confidence that despite us being the smallest company bidding, that model sealed the deal. Everyone respected the effort. If you work on something long and hard enough, good things will happen. Don't get discouraged. Remain positive and never give up. Quote, things often don't go as planned. Always have a plan B. Anticipate the unexpected. Unquote. Maybe I am really the unluckiest person in the world, but despite my efforts to check everything twice, often enough things still don't go as planned. I'm sure it happens to everyone at least sometimes. Please say it's so. Because of this curse that hangs over me, I have learned to always have a plan B, a fallback. I call it my rabbit hole. All our ground-living mammals have a back door as an emergency exit, just in case that hungry fox is waiting for dinner at the front door. I suppose it's kind of like being over-prepared for everything, or trying to anticipate the unexpected in advance. People have sometimes told me it's a waste of time and energy, but when they have benefited from it, there isn't a word out of them. I'm almost never late for anything because I plan for the unpredictable. I always have a paper map with me when driving, despite having a cell phone and navigation in my dashboard. I carry a spare pen cartridge in my bag, even though that new cartridge I put in my cross pen yesterday should last 3 months, except when it doesn't. I almost never have to make an excuse for not being able to do something, as I am always prepared to get things done. One way, Plan A, or the other, Plan B. In business, I would be tasked with putting together an Excel spreadsheet deck for a new proposal. There would be very specific points we were expected to cover. As well, I would always try to anticipate what kind of information someone might need even if it wasn't requested. It might have taken a couple extra hours to add in. While presenting and reviewing the deck at a meeting with top executives from some Fortune 500 company, partway through the presentation, someone, usually the head guy or gal who had nothing to do with preparing the request for bid, would interrupt and ask, "What about this or that?" I would reply, "Well, if you go to the back of the deck and look at Addendum A, I think that answers your question." There was the shuffling of papers and then silence as everyone read through my extra credit question. My company sealed more deals by being over-prepared, thanks to my anticipating the unexpected. "I'll have to get back to you" doesn't score any extra points. Back in my youth hockey days as an athletic trainer, there was a boy on the team with asthma. It scared the hell out of me when he had an attack on the bench during a game and couldn't take in any air. It was troubling, and I never looked forward to it. Early in the season, his mom gave me a bottle of Marex tablets, a reliable remedy for asthma flare-ups in the 70s. But I was always over-prepared and planned for the unexpected. I purchased a small oxygen tank and mask to carry in my trainer's bag. When he had an attack, I would give him a Marex and he would lie down on the bench, waiting for it to pass. But that oxygen tank was within arm's reach just in case. It's always good to have a plan B. Plan ahead for the unexpected. Don't be that person who's always making excuses for being late, or unprepared, or uninformed. If you expect things to go wrong or off track, you can prepare for them in advance. It will give you more confidence and relieve stress knowing that you can handle almost any unexpected outcome. Quote, "Never be afraid to take risks. If you don't try, you'll never know." Unquote. In the mid-70s, I was working at a summer hockey school for one of my mentors, Jack Leclerc, former Montreal Canadien, Stanley Cup, 1956. Midway through the summer, he told me he was going to be the general manager at a new ice rink that was scheduled to open in the fall. He asked if I would like to be his assistant manager. At age 18 and a half, it was a great opportunity, and I said yes. A week later, a friend, whom I previously worked for as an assistant trainer for a semi-pro hockey team in New Jersey, called to tell me he had relocated to North Carolina and was now the general manager for a new franchise in the Professional Southern Hockey League. He wanted to know if I would move down to North Carolina and become the equipment trainer for the team. I talked it over with Jack, and he told me I had to take the trainer's job, as much as he would have liked me to be his assistant. He noted it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The assistant manager job was a safe bet. It was close to home, amongst people that I knew well, and doing something I was sure I could handle. The trainer job, on the other hand, was a bit risky. I'd be leasing an apartment in North Carolina, being amongst almost no one I knew, and doing a job that I thought I might be able to handle, but these were professional athletes, and not a lot of room for error. I accepted the trainer position. Due to circumstances that not even I could have anticipated, yet nothing to do with my ability to perform the job, things didn't work out as planned. It was still the most exciting 2 months of my life, and I'm glad I made the decision I did. If you don't try, you'll never know. After my employer of 13 years shut down the operation, a longtime business associate and I decided to start up a new contract packaging company. We knew the business well. I was offered a great job opportunity doing the same thing I had been doing, which was a safe bet, but it would have required me to move from New Jersey to Chicago. It was something I wasn't prepared to do because of personal commitments. We opened in January 2007 and shut our business down in May 2009. The recession took the wind out of our sails, and as a young company, we couldn't recover. I bet everything on the business and tried anything I could to keep it going. We both knew it was a risk from the start and accepted whatever would come. Things don't always work out the way you would like them to, but you still owe it to yourself to try. Don't be afraid to take risks. Don't take risks that might cause you physical harm, but take those that may involve finance, employment, education, relationships, or whatever. If things don't work out, they can always be fixed, even if it may cause some temporary heartache and hardship. There are no guarantees in life. Taste and try as much as you can in our diverse world. If you don't, you'll never know. Quote, "If you remain focused on the prize, nothing is impossible." Unquote. We had a road game on Easter Sunday. I had 3 13-year-olds with me and decided to stop at the local ice rink before driving them home, thinking we might get some free ice time on the quiet holiday. Jacques Leclerc, the general manager, was the only one there. I asked if the boys and I could go on the empty ice for an hour, and he said sure. I also asked if he would come on the ice with us. He explained that although his skates were home, he would figure something out. When we got back from my car with our gear, Jack was wearing a pair of rental figure skates, along with gloves and a stick that he found in the rink office. He started out running the boys through light skating drills. We threw pucks on the ice, and Jack showed the youngsters some shooting techniques. He was a great teacher and a good mentor. After an hour or so, the boys were getting a bit tired, so Jack instructed the 3 to give him 5 hard laps around the rink before getting off. One of the boys sighed and said, do we have to?" Jack looked at them and said with his heavy French-Canadian accent, "You see that hole in the glass?" pointing to the referee's hole at the center ice scores table. "If I shoot the puck through that hole from the center ice faceoff circle, you must do 5 laps. If I miss, nothing. Okay?" A boy clarified, "1 shot?" Jack responded, "1 shot." All the boys nodded in agreement. They figured they had this bet sealed. No way anybody could shoot a puck through that small hole, especially with only 1 try. Jack skated over to the center faceoff spot, which was more than 40 feet from the side glass, and someone passed him a puck. He took his position looking up at the glass, then back down at the puck and stick, and then up at the glass again. Then he sort of flicked the puck. That damn 3-inch piece of vulcanized rubber sailed through the air, swishing through that maybe 4-inch hole and hitting the glass in the back of the scorer's booth. We were all standing close enough to the glass to see it go through without a wobble or bump. It was one of the most incredible things I had ever seen. Always remain focused on the prize, and amazing things can happen. A company was launching a line of hair care products and needed someone to decorate plastic containers with printed shrink labels. They didn't want to use the conventional method for shrinking labels using steam, as it could cause water droplets to collect inside the empty containers, potentially introducing bacteria to the product. We specialized in shrinking labels using dry heat. It's a much more delicate and unforgiving process. We provided samples and were soon awarded a contract. But here was the challenge. We had to be up and running within 4 months. To meet the contracted price and volume requirements, this had to be a fully automated line, running more than 100 containers a minute with only a few operators. As this was a huge project, I brought in outside help. I got all the major players together a week later and outlined the challenges we were facing. Everyone in the room doubted we could pull it off, but 4 months later, we were entertaining our customer with wine and cheese at our plant and demonstrating how that $1 million automated line worked. Throughout the 4 months, I kept everyone focused on the prize and worked through problems on the fly. Nothing is impossible. Sometimes it just takes a little more effort and some luck.